Hey everybody, so glad that you've decided to join us online today. Whether it's your first time or just your first time in a long time, we're glad that you're here. And speaking of joining us, we want to remind you that we are fully open here at GatheringPoint. As summer is winding down and school is ramping back up and we're getting back into our normal rhythms and routines, we want to invite you to come join us for a live in-person service on Sunday mornings at 9 or 10:30 a.m. And we hope you'll consider checking us out soon. Well, in just a few moments, Pastor Paul is going to come and share with us. And we're going to explore this idea of what it's like when we want to be in charge of our own lives. It's freedom that we want, but it isn't always the kind of freedom that we need.
So last year, during the pandemic, my family went on a vacation, and it was my wife's family. All of my wife's family went on vacation. A house was rented, and we went into the house, and there was like a furniture piece checkerboard in the house. And checkers is one of those games where, we've never had to tell our kids. It's not one of those we're like, kids are going, hey, as soon as we get home today, can we play checkers? Like, it's not those kind of games. We've never had to say, hey, you've been on your checkerboard too long. I think you probably need to put the pieces away for a while. It's not one of those games at all where people are dying to play it, or hey, I'm in a checkers tournament this weekend. I mean, it's just not one of those things. But when we were on vacation, and there was this piece of furniture, and we were out of our element, it became a very, very popular game. And it's a fun game because there was strategy. Nobody had played enough where it was like, hey, there's this dominant player. There was strategy, and you could figure some stuff out. It could be competitive. And I don't know if you know anything about my children, but they are extremely competitive. And so we could be playing Kick the Rock, and it turns into a full-scale athletic tournament event type of a thing. And so checkers is one of those games that involves moves and some thinking and some strategy, and obviously, and we all know it's not complicated. You're trying to make these strategic moves so that you can get them to your opponent to move their pieces off the back line, because the sooner you can get them off the back line, you can move your pieces into the position to become what? King. And the importance of being king is that you have a competitive advantage. It's really unfair. And I don't even know, it's probably, I'll get an email, be like, well, you can if you do this, but I don't know if you can win the game without being king. Because when you're king, you get provided opportunities that you don't. If you're not king, you are subjected to only moving forward in diagonal patterns. But when you're king, you can go whatever direction you want to go. And that competitive advantage is something that we all strive for. And so that's what that all comes down to. And I think when we look at that desire for ourselves to be king, because it allows us to do the things we want to do and go the places that we want to go when we want to go there, it is probably a better description of the American dream than we probably want to. Isn't that true? I mean, really? I mean, yeah, the American dream, yeah, we want a house, and we want 2.2 kids and a white picket fence, all that. But I don't really think that's probably an accurate description of the American dream. I think the American dream is probably more closely affiliated with this. I want to be able to do what I want, when I want, with whom I want. And there's probably a footnote to that as well, which is as long as that doesn't hurt anybody. But I think once, and we've all done it, we've all had that, you went through teenagers where you wanted to do what you wanted, when you wanted, with whom you wanted, and you went through your teenage years, and then for some of you, you went off to college, and your freshman year of college, you dipped your toe into that, I want to do what I want with it, who I want, and where I want. And some of you are doing it in your 40s, right, and you're doing what you want, when you want, where you want, and all that, but you just have less hair now, and maybe you have a belly, and so that's a little bit different for that. And then it's one of those things where we go, as long as it doesn't hurt anybody. But I think oftentimes what we fail to realize, and I know I've done this in too, is that I'm a somebody too. And even though I'm thinking I'm not hurting somebody else, I'm actually hurting myself, and I'm a somebody. And this freedom that we so intentionally want, it eventually hurts ourselves, and it also hurts the people that are closest to us, the people that we say we love, and the people that are coming behind us. And this is expressed in big ways and in small ways. And before we start hanging our head going, yeah, boy, when I did that, man, when I was 24, and man, when I was, 41, and when I was 30, and when I was 15, and we start thinking about the stories where, did you know that was wrong? Yeah, I knew it was wrong. Why'd you do it? Well, because I wanted to. Did you express it in those terms, those ways? No, not at all, right? But this whole mindset is not new. In fact, it's very, very old. It's been around for forever. In ancient Israel begins as sort of like a divine intervention, which means God gets involved in their life and strategically helps them move, kind of like a checkerboard. Hey, we're going to go left. If you go left, I'll be with you and I'll protect you. And now we're going to go left, and I'm going to tell you when to make that move. And if you go left when I'll say that, you won't even have to fight the other army. I'll just hand the army over to you. And if you do this, and if you follow me, and if I am your king, and you do what I say, your life is going to be so much easier. Because yes, you're going to have struggle and heartache, but I'm going to see you through, and I'm going to go through you there. And so this nation is created as a theocracy where God would be king and God would rule over them. And this is kind of when Moses was there. Remember Moses, he was in a basket, and then he grew up in Pharaoh's king, and then he killed somebody, and then he had to go in hiding, and then a bush talked to him, and then he runs back, and he begins to set my people free. And Charlton Heston told us best, let my people, right? The whole thing. And so we find Moses, and they're following God, and God says right, and they're going right, and they're out of Pharaoh. They're no longer slaves. They're no longer captives. And then Moses dies. And now in the story we have Joshua. And Joshua is this great warrior, and they're taking down people, and God's saying left, and they're saying right, and all of these things are going great, but the nation is not immune to trouble. And by the time Joshua goes, we get to this book called Judges. And before you get excited, I've been trying to set this up so it's kind of like you're going to eat your broccoli, but I'm trying to put enough cheese on the broccoli that you're like, oh, it's okay. We'll try it. But we're going to spend the next few weeks in the book of Judges. And you're like, oh, wow. Well, we're going to take another vacation, right? We're going to be in the book of Judges. And it takes place between the time where Israel settled in the land under Joshua and in the establishment of Israel as a kingdom. And before Joshua was Moses, and the Hebrews lived in Egypt, and Moses sort of parted the Red Seas, and you know the story, and now they head back home, and they're following. God says left, they go left. God says right, they go right. They begin to move strategically. And so we have about this period of about 300 and some years. 300 years. It's like this commonwealth of 12 tribes. We could even call them like the United Tribes of Israel. It would be like instead of their flag having 13 stars, they had like 12 stars. They were like these states that all were a part of a group, like the United States. They were this group, but they were 12 individual tribes, and they were united. And the book of Judges sort of chronicles and tells the narrative of this cycle that takes place. And this cycle goes over and over and over. And the reason we're going to do this is because it's a cycle that we've seen in our own life, in our family's life, maybe in your workplace. And it's simply this: disobedience leads to disaster. And then after disaster leads to deliverance. And it starts over. Disobedience leads to disaster. And then disaster leads to deliverance. And then the next story. And over and over and over we have this. And so here's what I want to do. I want to go to the final scene in the book of Judges, right? I want to start at the very end. And in this final scene in the book of Judges, this is where this all ends as they continue to go, but I want to be king. And so this is where the final book of Judges goes. In Judges chapter 21, verse 25, it says this: in those days, there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. because there was no binding moral compass, so everyone followed their own moral compass, meaning if I want this to be right, it's right. And if you want that to be right, then it's right. And so our series is going to end, we're actually going to begin at the end of the book of Joshua, and then we're going to move on through to this thing. And the end of Joshua, I mean, this is just a great story. The end of Joshua ends like a scene at the end of church camp, okay? Anybody ever go to church camp growing up as a kid? You ever go to church camp? Yeah, all 6 of you are probably been in therapy since then, right? But those of you that went, do you remember the last night of church camp? I mean, it's always emotional. I actually never went as a teen because I was like, But I had to go when I was a youth pastor because they said, that's your job. So I went. But it was always like, it was so emotional, and there's like this big song, and there's Kleenex Fest, and usually teens on the last night of church camp make this big commitment to God, and this is how the end of Joshua ends, right? On the last night of church camp, you decide you're going to break up with your boyfriend or girlfriend. You're just, I just can't do it anymore. You're coming between me and God, and so there's this emotional thing, and if you're not from a church background, and you're like, that sounds weird, let me help you out. It is. Okay, I don't want you to be like, that's weird. That's why I didn't go. Right, I'm with you. I got you, okay? And you decide that, and then you leave, and you're like, oh, God, I'm going to patch things up with my parents. I hate my mom, but I'm going to be nice to her now. And you decide you're going to do that. And then if you went to special camps, they would say, like, if you have mixtapes and Art of God, you need to burn them. If you have CDs that are not, singing the praises of God, you need to burn those CDs. And you committed all kinds of stuff, right? You decided, I'm never going to cuss again. I'm not going to hang out with those people. And you just got caught up in that moment, and you were like, this is how it's going to be. My wife went to one of these growing up, and at the end of the week, they told all the kids, like, if you're really, really serious about following God, you'll get rid of all your secular music, all your non-Christian music. You'll throw it away or burn it and all this. And she didn't. She made it very clear. I love Jesus, and I want to follow Jesus, but I don't see how getting rid of my Journey CDs is going to help me draw closer to Jesus. In fact, if you'd pay attention, Journey is actually the one that said, to don't stop believing and to hold on to that feeling. Whoa. And isn't that what you just said we're supposed to do when we go home? But on the last night of church camp, you decide you're going to quit everything. And you're serious. And you're sincere. And you meant it. And it was real. But it just didn't last very long, did it? Maybe it was a retreat. Maybe it was a church service, and you were like, that's it. Today's the day. And it just didn't last very long. And some of you experienced this, and you were going to start, you didn't go to camp, but you were going to start praying. You left the church service. You're like, I'm going to pray every day. I'm going to read my Bible. I'm going to read my Bible for a long time every day. I'm going to do this devotional book. I'm going to join a group. I'm going to do all this. And it just didn't last. Have you ever wondered why? Because in that moment, you were so serious and you were so sincere. And this is really the same thing that happens in the end of the book of Joshua before we even get to Judges. I mean, they're all sitting around the campfire. They're sitting around the campfire. They're singing Kumbaya and, love you, Lord, and all this kind of stuff. And they're serious, and there's a final speech at the campfire, and they're all fired up. We're going to do it different. We're going to take our high school. And there's one it's awesome. And then the next morning, they all get on the bus, and they're all going to head home. And this is the final speech. Joshua records it in chapter 24, verse 14. This is what he says. He says, now fear the Lord. Kids, fear the Lord, and serve him with all faithfulness. Throw away the gods and the CDs and the mixtapes of your ancestors. They worship those beyond the Euphrates River, unless it's Journey, because there may be hidden lyrics that are helpful to you, okay? In the Euphrates and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day whom you'll serve. If you're not going to serve the Lord, do that. If you're not going to serve the Lord, break up with this guy, break up with that girl. If this girl is pushing you further away from God, break up with her. If stop cussing, obey your parents, get rid of your cigarettes, stop, doing all these things. If you're looking at stuff on social media that exploits women or exploits men, if you're looking at things that, give that up and serve the Lord. Then verse 16, then the people answered, well, far be it from me to forsake the Lord to serve other gods. Because it was the Lord our God himself who brought us out of our parents out of Egypt and from the land of slavery and performed those great signs before our eyes. Verse 18, we too will serve the Lord because he's our God. And Joshua sort of taunts him a little bit here. And he says, I'm not so sure you can do this because this is the exact same thing you said at the end of last year's camp. And they responded in verse 21. This is just honest. It's just honest. No, but the people said to Joshua, no, we're serious this year. We will serve the Lord. And they did serve the Lord for a while. And then something happened to them. They got home, and none of their commitments stuck. And so we find ourselves right there. They come back from this retreat. They came back from this very powerful service, and they're all like coming back. And Judges picks up the story here. And this is where we start our cycle, right? This is where this whole thing starts. In Judges chapter 2, verse 11. Verse 11, we read this, and then this is what happened when they got home. Then the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and they served the Baals, which are like smaller gods. They forsook the Lord that they just went to camp with, the God of their ancestors who had brought them out of Egypt, and they followed and worshiped. They devoted themselves to various gods of the peoples that were all around them, and it aroused the Lord's anger because they forsook him and served Baal, and your guess is as good as mine, whoever they served. I don't know. Sure with people. Nobody ever knows. In his anger against Israel, the Lord gave them into the hands of the raiders, and this had never happened before, who plundered them. And he sold them into the hands of their enemies all around them, who they were no longer able to resist. They weren't able to resist him because they were doing what they wanted to do. They were not following the rules that had been laid out before him. And they were in, verse 15, they were in great distress. And what we find out is that Israel had actually traded one king, the one true king, the one creator God king, and they traded him for another king because they flipped their checker and go, we made it. We made it all the way into the promised land. King me. King me. So now I can do whatever I want to do, wherever I want, whenever I want. And in their attempt to sort of throw off authority, they find themselves under an entirely different authority. And they thought they were doing things that were right, but it didn't turn out to be right. And they forsook the Lord, and they decided, I'll do what I want to do because I think this is what I should do. So I'll do what I want to do, and no one's going to tell me what to do, except for me. And they started to follow, it said, and we just read it, they started to follow the people around them, and they ended up doing what everybody else around them was doing. And this is a known cycle. I mean, I've seen this numerous times, even this week. If you hang out with 5 successful people all the time, if you hang out with 5 successful people every day, you'll be the 6th successful person in that group. And if you hang out with 5 bums regularly over an extended period of time, guess what? You'll be the 6th bum. And that's what happened. If you kind of put yourself around those people, you'll start to become and act and think like the people here around. And so Israel surrendered their freedom, and they lost their freedom to choose, and they were no longer able to resist. They couldn't resist. They came home from camp, I was serious about that, but now this group's going over here, so I'm going to go over there, and I'm going to do this. And they traded this king for another king. And when you say no to God, and pay attention to this, this is so important, this is so important. When you say no to God, don't you eventually just trade one king for another and you king yourself? And when you throw off God's authority, you eventually place yourself under the authority of a smaller, not compassionate king. Because when you throw off moral and religious and even ethical restraints, you surrender to the rule of little and unmerciful, unforgiving, created kings. And the little tiny kings always succumb to excuses, right? Because the little kings go, I can't help lust, right? I can't help it. I'm under its rule and I'm under its reign and it has control over me and I can't stop it. And guess what? You're right. And I can't stop my appetites. Every time I try, I'm under their kingdom. I'm a subject under their kingdom, and I can't stop those appetites, or I can't stop the greed, because every time I think about breaking the cycle of greed and being generous, this other king steps into my life and goes, you can't afford it. You have to keep track of yours. You need you for you. And even the small king of insecurity begins to tell you all kinds of stuff in your head that's not true. And you submit to that king. And consumption and fear. And some of you, it's like generational dysfunction. And you're like, I can't help. I can't get out from underneath this kingdom. My parents were under that kingdom. My grandparents were under that kingdom. It's just who we are. Could be selfishness. And so we've got all these little kings that we bow down to and we give full authority to our life, and they won't let us go from their kingdom. But who in the end will lead you to a place where you will cry, I just can't do this anymore. And so this is what I found out in my own life, and I actually wrote this down, and I want to be very, very clear, because these are the things that I've just learned the hard way. It's always easier to say no to God than it is to say no to the things you substitute for God. Isn't it true? It's much easier for me to say no to God than it is to say no to insecurity or fear, appetites. It's much easier for me to say no to God when you leave camp, and it's much easier for me to say no to God and say yes to a destructive relationship. I mean, it's harder. It's harder to say no to a destructive relationship than it is to say no to God. It's easier to say no to God than it is to that thing that has become your habit. You can't say no to that habit. You can say no to God. It's easier. The habit has control of you, though. Isn't this true? And this is exactly where we find ourselves in the book of Judges. Because these little tiny kings, your habits and all those kinds of things, they're not merciful. And they never give life. They only take your freedom. They do not offer freedom. So, Judges chapter 3, verse 8. I just want to point this out real quick, because there's going to be a bunch of words that I don't even know how to say, right? But here's what I want you to do. I want everyone real quick to spell God. Can you spell God real quick? I'll give you the first letter. Then you finish it. Ready? G. Okay, good. Let's go to next one. Spell Lord. I'll give you the first letter. L. Right. So let's read this verse 3, verse 8. Here we go. The anger of the Lord burned against Israel so that he sold them into the hands of the... It looks like alphabet soup to me. I don't know. But that's your new king. Your king before, you knew his name and he knew your name. And this is your new king and you can't even pronounce it. And where's his kingdom? I don't know. That place. I don't know how to say that either. That's your new king. Your old king was named Yahweh. His name was the Lord. His name was God, your heavenly Father. Now your new king is, who knows? To whom the Israelites were subjected for 8 years. I mean, you can't even spell your new king's name. And this is what happens so subtly. In our attempt to do what we want, when we want, with whom we want, we simply are trading one king for another king. And maximum freedom is only found under the authority of your creator king. So in closing, here's a few things I want you to leave with. You were not created to rule yourself. And while it's very helpful and strategic in the game of checkers, you were not created to make yourself king. And as long as you try to attempt to do that, eventually you're going to find yourself at the mercy of some smaller kings and some things that you can't get out from underneath and you may not even be able to pronounce. And these little kings will control your life, and your entire life will be reduced to a bunch of excuses of why you can't leave those kingdoms. And as a pastor, one of my greatest joys is watching people leave those kingdoms and return to their king. And my greatest sorrow is when people leave their king and submit to smaller kingdoms. And the greatest news is that when you cry out and say, God, the little kingdoms, the king of appetite and fear and lust and insecurity and greed and generational dysfunction and alcohol and loneliness, they're destroying me. And when you're ready to admit that, your king is willing to do what these kings cannot do, and that is to rescue you. But he requires unconditional surrender. You can't live in two kingdoms. Anything less will simply prolong the agony of what these kingdoms have already taken from you. So do not be deceived. They do what they want, when they want, with whom they want. And these people discover over time, and sometimes it's a lifetime, that one king leads to another, and they constantly are saying, you know what, I don't want to submit to that king, so king me. But that's not the way we were created. So over this month of August, we want to turn to our Creator King, and we want to leave some other kingdoms we can't even pronounce, kings that we don't even know, and return home. Return home. Can I pray with you today? Father, today, at some point in our life, if we haven't already, we'll try out another kingdom. And we'll think and we'll be deceived and we'll read a fake brochure that says this kingdom has what you're looking for. And it will lie to us and it will lead us down a path of excuses, and we'll just excuse our way through life. Well, I couldn't help it. They couldn't help it. We shouldn't. We couldn't. They could. And God, we are slaves to another king. So would you help us to pack up and fully surrender our entire lives to our Creator King, who's the only one who's merciful and compassionate and can free us from the tyranny of the little kings. It's in your Son's name we pray. Amen. Amen. Hey, so glad you joined us here today, whether online or in person. Thanks for coming.
Hey there, thanks for joining us on YouTube today. If you liked what you heard, be sure to like and subscribe to our page where you can watch previous messages. We hope you found this content helpful and that it adds value to your life. See you next week.